Okay, so we're back. So, Mom, sorry about the interruption. So, tell us a little bit about where you're from and something about your parents, your family.
Well, I was born in 1924 in, the hospital was located in Montague City, which is right outside of Greenfield, Massachusetts.
Oh.
But we shortly moved to a little town called Orange, Massachusetts, where my dad started a store, a grocery store that he and my mother were involved in my lifetime there at home. And both of them spent a great deal of time making making a living, supporting my sister Fran and I.
Yeah.
She was 4 years older than I was, and a wonderful, loving good sister. Took so much care of me and was so much fun to be with.
Yeah.
And we were close our whole lives.
Hey, Mom, do you have any idea how your parents met? How your parents met?
I really don't know too much about how they met. I do know that my mother's family had 5 children. There were 3 boys and 2 girls, and they all stayed in the same community all while I was growing up. And as it turned out, my mother's mother died of a stroke on a trolley car, I believe it was, very early on. And probably, I would say, in her late 40s or early 50s. And so my Aunt Anna, who was the oldest one in the family, had married and left home. And so my mother felt the need to stay there and take care of her father and whatever brothers were still at home. As a result of that, she married what in those days would have been considered late, but certainly not by today's standards. And so she and my father were somewhat older when they had my sister and I.
Yeah.
It was a very ordinary little town, closely knit. Went to school there through high school, and later discovered that there were some shortcomings in being in a school of this size, because it took me a lot of work to catch up and for the preparation that was required when I went off to college. And I actually ended up going to Bates College, and some of my children have asked me how I made that decision. Well, as it turns out, I had an English teacher who was very interested in me and felt that I had talent. She had gone to Bates and felt that it was absolutely the place for me. So whereas my parents, I think, had hoped I would go in the Boston area, which was only about 80 miles away, I ended up going to this college up in Lewiston, Maine. And it was indeed a very good school, but if nothing else wonderful came out of it, the fact that I met Grandpa made the whole thing more than worthwhile.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it up there. We met our freshman year when I saw him go through a hoop of fire on a ski jump, and I felt that this was so exciting that I wanted to meet this person, and I invited him on a sleigh ride, and he has never let me forget that I was the first person to ask him on a date.
Can you tell us a little bit about the way he proposed to you? I assume that he did.
Well,
Or did you ask him to marry you?
oh no, no, I wasn't that progressive. Definitely not. I'm trying to remember the exact occasion, and I'm not sure that I do, but it became very clear. Night after night, he would just stop by to see me, usually after a 5 or 10 mile run. He was constantly, well, he was on the track team, but mainly his purpose was to stay in shape for ski racing,
Yeah.
which is something that he always did. And
There's some water there if you need some water, Mom.
okay, I have told you that in those days, everybody was expected to ski all 4 events. So he skied downhill, slalom, cross country, and jumping. He became the New England champion in slalom at the time that he was in school, but also on more than one occasion won the jumping at Dartmouth College, which was a huge jump and something that you wouldn't want to even stand at the top of if you had your choice.
If you were within your right mind, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that point, it was the end of our freshman year. The war was on, and Dad had planned to be a doctor. He was in a pre-med program. So he was offered the opportunity to take examinations, the regular exams that are given for medical school, and if he was able to pass them after his freshman year in college, he would be able to go on to medical school. So he did take the exams, and he got accepted at Harvard, Yale, and Columbia, and decided that he would like to go to Harvard. So after his freshman year in college, he was sent down to the University of Pennsylvania for 8 months of concentrated pre-medical school work, and then went directly into medical school as soon as he finished that program. And from that time on until he graduated, he just had a week or 2 off a year. So by the time he got to his senior year, he was pretty well worn out. And in the meanwhile, I stayed at Bates, but I finally transferred to Boston University and finished up there because we
Yeah.
had a little apartment in Boston. I must say that funds were so limited that there was a couple that was graduating, and they had a small apartment within walking distance of the university, and of course we didn't have a car or anything, just bicycles. So that was a perfect place to be because
Yeah.
he could walk to most everything. And
Can you so let's skip forward a little bit. Can you tell us anything about how you decided to settle down in Fairfield, Connecticut?
oh, mercy, that's a big leap. We ended up going to his first residency in Hartford Hospital, and at that time the Korean War was on, and it looked as though he would be sent to Korea all that summer. We had in that time we had 2 children, but as it turned out, although many of our friends were sent to the war in Korea, we were lucky enough to be sent as a family to Europe and ended up in Stuttgart, Germany. And while there, Dad was skiing with a very prominent urologist in Boston, and he spoke in his behalf, and so we ended up, after several years in Germany, of going back to Boston. And when he finished his training there, he was looking around for a place to stay, and he went up to Hanover, thinking that maybe we might settle in Hanover, New Hampshire. But they already had a lot of urologists, and he met a fellow from Fairfield, Connecticut, who was an internist and said, we desperately need a urologist at our hospital, and we'd love to have you come down. So he went down to Fairfield, and I didn't get to go because I had the children to take care of. But when he came back, he said, if you ever see this town, you'll never want to go anyplace else. So we decided to go there and set up a practice, and that's how we ended up in Connecticut. And it was a very, very good choice because we were right on the Sound so that we could sail. We were just a little less than 80 miles from New York City. Not that Dad liked to go to the city very much, but it was there if we wanted to. And we were just a couple of hours from Vermont, where we eventually bought a ski house with the Carter family and the Dowling family. So it ended up with 6 adults and 11 children.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very happy 30-year relationship. I think everybody learned to perfection the ability to give and take and to feel that everybody was included. I always felt that it was one of the best learning experiences the children in the house could have had, because they made an effort to, we always had extra people with us. And I think we made an effort to see that everybody felt included. We didn't have any television wasn't allowed in the house, so everybody spent a lot of time playing games. And that was great fun.
In the wintertime, during those Mount Snow days, what was it like packing up the car every other weekend and heading off to the mountains and back again?
It worked out so that I had everything ready in the front hall by the time Dad got home from the hospital. And usually on the Fridays that we were going up, he'd try to get home about 5:30 or 6 at the latest. I would have dinner packed. We'd put everything in the car. As a family, we lived with one car for a very, very long time. And how we got everybody in that car with all the luggage is still a mystery to me, but somehow we managed. And by the time we got up to the house, it was about 8 o'clock, and we had a late supper. And so it gave us a much longer weekend. We were able to start out skiing on Saturday morning and didn't leave until Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
So it was the closest place. We never thought we wanted a place like Westover, Vermont, because Mount Snow sort of had a reputation of being New York, but it really wasn't, because we had a house on the mountain, and once you got there, you didn't have to get in the car again. You could just ski across the street to the lifts.
Right.
And that way, maybe the downside was that everybody got to go home for lunch as well.
Yeah.
So, but Ann Carter in particular had wanted to do this because before that, because of her polio, she would have to stay at the base lodge. So this way, she could be at the house and get to see everybody as they came and went. So that was really a very special place.
I'm bouncing around a little bit, but there's a lot of material to cover here. So I'm wondering if you have a particularly fond memory of the old post road that you could share with us. Anything that sticks out in your mind?
Well, the old post road was a very special place. When I first looked at it, it was so huge and in such as far as decoration was concerned, a disaster. I don't think that the wallpapers had been changed since 1929, and it needed a lot of work. And I said, no, I can't do that. So in the spring, by the time I'd done a lot of looking, I realized it was the only place that was large enough to accommodate our family. We had 4 children by that time, everybody but Chip. And interestingly enough, that we bought that house at that time for $28,000, which was, at that time it seemed like a lot of money, but of course in today's world it's nothing. I think the fact that Chip was born in that house and came back and we made what had been my sewing room up at the front of the house, turned into his nursery. And everybody was so excited to have him because he was 8 years younger than the other children. So it was like he had 6 parents, 4 siblings and a mother and father. And everybody was just so thrilled with his every progress, his first step, his first word, his first whatever.
Yeah.
That was, and it was a place where everybody could come. We had a pool table in the basement, and people would stop by and they'd ask for one of the kids, and I'd say, well, they're not home, but I know you really want to play pool. So, come in.
Go on down.
And so it made a great gathering place. It was wonderful because it was located close to school. Everybody could walk to and from school for lunch. They could get to the library, they could get to the dentist, and it was just a perfect place to raise children.
It must have been a hard place to leave. How did you decide to move, and what was that like?
It got to the point that the last child home was Chip, and it was such a big house, and I took care of that house completely by myself in the 22 years we lived there, and literally painted every wall. I never did the ceilings, but I did all the walls and trim at least 3 times during those 22 years. And it just got to be more than we wanted to do. And Dad had always wanted to live on the water, and there was a contemporary house over there by a very famous architect named Harwell Harrison Harris. He was not well known in New England, but he was had studied under Frank Lloyd Wright, and was very famous in California and states out west. So we went over to see that house, and Dad was just horrified at the price, just scared to death, but it seemed to be a good thing. And it was, at that time, $250,000. Seemed like a lot of money. But we wanted to scale down inside.